All right. So as a reminder, our housekeeping tips for today, all participants right now are in listen-only mode, so everyone's muted just to avoid all of the noise and interference today so we can hear our speaker. Please use the Q&A feature. It's on your toolbar, so you'll see the black toolbar in your Zoom toolbar. Go ahead and use that if you have any questions or issues, anything that comes up today for the speaker. We're going to go ahead, unless we can answer a question quickly during the event, we'll have a discussion portion in the end where Dr. Brooke Stuart will go ahead and answer any questions and discuss anything that you bring up. So today's presentation slides were pre-recorded so that we can go ahead and have clear audio. We'll do a live introduction, we'll run through our presentation, and then we'll open up the live discussion at the very end of our presentation today. So after the webinar, we'll have a post survey. So make sure if you've completed the pre-survey that you go ahead and do the post survey following our event. We'll send you a reminder email also. So if you're on just the phone line today with us, that you can still access that post survey link. And I'd like to go ahead and start off by introducing our speaker today. So today's presenter is Dr. Brooke Stuart. She is the founder of Let Go and Grow International. She's a holistic doctor in private practice where she assists her patients in unlocking their own intrinsic power to heal. Over the past 12 years, Dr. Brooke Stuart has worked with thousands of people using her online platform, speaking engagements, as well as her one-on-one consultations in private practice. Dr. Brooke Stuart holds degrees in medical anthropology, psychology, and integrative medicine. She uses a combination of holistic counseling and functional medicine to personalize and tailor treatments for her patients in Orlando, Florida. And as a physician, she's deeply committed to her patients' personal growth and development, and she uses solution-oriented methods in order to clear issues, create health, and assist patients in realizing their own true potential to heal. So without further ado, I'll let Brooke go ahead and introduce herself briefly here as well.
Wonderful. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so honored to be here and to be a part of this project. Thank you, Natalie, for making it so easy to be a part of it. I mean, you're absolutely wonderful. And you guys for showing up and taking time out of your day. I appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And I hope you find the information in this webinar helpful. And I am completely here for you to answer any questions at the end. And we will dive in as deep as you'd like to go. We'll definitely talk about how to shift out of the pain response to work with it, all by way of working with what we have under our jurisdiction through our power of choice and through shifting the stress response, which I find can actually be more direct and approachable and easier to consume than so often thought. And so let's dive into it. And I cannot wait to get your feedback, to get your thoughts, to get your questions. And I will be here for it at the end. So thank you guys so much for being here. And I hope you enjoy this presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. And so we'll go ahead and get started again with the presentation portion today. If you have any questions, do you feel like typing them in throughout, use that Q&A box, and then we'll get to that at the very end in our discussion portion. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over now to our presentation.
Welcome to this presentation, everyone, on managing pain and how we can shift the stress response. I'm Dr. Brooke Stuart, and I'm a holistic doctor in private practice. I'm technically an acupuncture physician in the state of Florida, and I'm so honored to be able to share some of my work with you guys through this presentation in collaboration with the University of Florida. It's such an honor to be here. And today we are going to explore how we can manage pain by working with the stress response. Pain can increase stress, stress can increase pain, and age can clearly exacerbate both, right? So In this presentation, we are going to focus on what we can do about this. This is where we can begin to explore from a holistic lens on how the mind affects the body affects the mind, and how you can begin to work with both. So let's look at an overview of what we're going to be discussing in this presentation. I think it's important that I introduce myself a bit so that you can kind of get to know where I come from, the perspective that I'm going to share with you guys, and what these practical tips and resources and the tools that we're going to dive into will look like. We're then going to go into kind of defining stress, and in a way, maybe redefining it from what we've typically learned to believe, and how we can optimize it to manage pain, how we can shift the stress response with a holistic approach to cultivate resilience through our perception and very specific mindfulness and meditation practices that we can actually use to apply right away. And we're going to sum it all up in a little 3-minute meditation. That's the first prescription I actually give to each and every one of my patients. And I actually go around and I share it with teams and organizations to begin to basically integrate a lot of what we're going to talk about here today in the form of just a very simple practice that you can take home and that you can use to self-regulate and cultivate more resilience and shift the stress response in just a moment of time. And then we're going to go into more application and resources that are specific to adults over 50. So who am I? So as I've mentioned, I'm an acupuncture physician, a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and I'm also trained in functional medicine, where we look at the root cause to issues. And of course, this can vary based on perspective, and that's why this project and so many others are becoming so interesting and cool, because we can all kind of work together and integrate in terms of what is best for each individual patient. I also am the founder of an organization called Let Go and Grow, where we basically look at what does work, what doesn't, and why when it comes to health and well-being. And we bring this to thousands of individuals across the country and also to teams, organizations, and it's the same concepts that I use in my private practice. And so in my private practice, what I do is I work with a variety of people, all ages, with numerous different conditions often. And what I find is that without a holistic foundation, they're typically caught up in this cycle of going 1 step forward and 2 steps back versus just simply forward. And a lot of times they're doing a lot of great things in terms of pain management, and in terms of conventional practice, which I completely encourage and find extraordinary in terms of what can happen in that realm. But what I do is I work on the underlying basics. So for example, working with mindset, diet, lifestyle, making sure that my patients are sleeping properly, that they're detoxing well, that they have a mindset that is conducive to health and well-being. And so what we are going to be up to today is working with these practices, bringing in more of that holistic understanding so that we can get your foundation resilient and strong. And so we know where the untapped potential lies in terms of what we can do now to begin to fill in some of those gaps so that we can just get you moving forward. One of the things that I find so interesting about Chinese medicine is that they really, truly, and completely see the mind and body as one. So they see physiology having impact on the mental and emotional, and they see the mental and emotional having impact on physiology. And that was always a very interesting perspective as a student that I was able to learn and get to kind of experience and see how if we are able to kind of work with different intervention, how can it impact the whole system of a human being? And so if we really all take a moment to think about it, we all know that if we are in pain, it's going to be a lot more difficult to be in the best mood that we can be in, right? It's not always easy to shift into that when our whole body is contracted and distressed in a state of pain. And we also know that if we are staying in that negative state, stuck in kind of buying into that survival mode without looking at the whole and complete picture of our lives, that it's very, very, very difficult to see anything other than pain. And it's hard to be in touch with what else we can do and getting into that mobile state that can shift us into a healing mode. Okay, so in order to understand how we can shift the stress response and manage pain, we should first begin to kind of define stress, a stressor, and how stress is actually created and what we can do with it and about it. So, stress is the total mind body response experienced when we perceive that we do not have the resources to handle a life experience. At its core, stress is a disturbance in homeostasis that results in a series of psychological and physiological adaptations. And we'll be using the word evolutionary mismatch quite a bit throughout this presentation. But basically, what this means is that our body can perceive certain inputs or lack thereof as an evolutionary mismatch, meaning our body doesn't necessarily feel safe. And when it feels safe, we can actually begin to heal and shift from a sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze state where we feel very, very distressed into when we feel safe, we can actually begin to shift more readily into a parasympathetic mode where we feel calm, connected, and our systems are able to begin to unwind, relax, and heal. So, what is a stressor? So, while a stressor is the stimulus or the perceived threat that in turn triggers the stress response, like pain, a final exam, argument, or food intolerance. But also, if we're really looking at this, so pain can be a stress response, meaning that it can be it can be caused by stress, but it can also be a stimulus or a stressor, where pain actually is a stressor in it of itself. So what can we do about this? How can we actually work with our levels of stress and actually begin to focus on what we can do? So level of stress. So how do we come to that how do we kind of create an equation out of this, right? So simply our level of stress is determined by what we are given and how we choose to interpret it. It is the interplay between our genetic predisposition, life experiences, perception, and choices. So we may not always be able to choose what we're given, right? It's not like we're intentionally choosing to be in pain, but we can choose how we interpret it, and we can choose the choices that we make from that space. So often we can feel disabled, right? Focusing on what we can't do, all that we can't do, all that we've been given, that may not seem like a fair sort of hand, right? But in order to mobilize and actually begin to work with the stress response, we have to kind of shift gears and focus on where we're capable, how capable we are, and what we can do with our power to choose moving forward, even if that is with our perception, how we interpret the experience of pain in and of itself, how we interact with it, but also practical choices that can actually make it a lot easier to manage and to work with. For example, if we're eating healthy, we're going to be able to decrease inflammation, which is kind of our body's language of saying, okay, something is off, right? That can create even more distress. But if we're able to work with inflammation through diet, lifestyle, mindset, if we're able to sleep better at night, we're going to have more time to repair and to heal. So all of these fundamental basics actually have a very direct impact on the stress response, our ability to handle stress becoming bigger than it versus everything feeling bigger than us, where it can feel very overwhelming and disabling. So we want to kind of come into a state of capability where we know we have tools to actually work with what's coming up in our lives, whether that's pain or other experiences. So, what we are really trying to do here, right, is to build capacity and resilience by learning and trying on self regulating tools that can really help send our full system a signal of safety, thus releasing total burden by understanding what does work, what doesn't, and why, decreasing inflammation, and of course, relieving pain so that we can manage it in a new way. Now, when I talk about what does work, what doesn't, and why, let me give you a quick example. So, for example, something that may not work may be sleeping with the lights on, right? Something that does work could be sleeping with the lights off, right? Creating a dark, cold ecosystem to optimize and deepen sleep. And if we understand how this works in relationship with pain and how it interacts, how this choice interacts with pain, we can then begin to connect with it more. And it actually cultivates a motivation to engage in choices that truly work, while also the motivation to remove and to release the choices that don't work. And so, this is how we can begin to engage in the fundamentals and empower ourselves and mobilize towards health by bringing in these choices and really creating understanding around what works, what doesn't, and why. And now, of course, we also want to honor your uniqueness, right? Your individuality in terms of what works for you may not work for me. What works for you may not work for your neighbor or your best friend. And so we always want to begin to check in with ourselves to see what works, what doesn't, and why for us, right? Talking to your doctor, to anyone else on your health team, if you're a caregiver, really looking at the unique aspects of who you're working with and watching that, observing that, seeing how, certain choices impact. And from there, making an evaluation when you have that time to reflect and to kind of look at what can work and what also doesn't. And this is also where mindfulness and meditation and what we'll be up to learning today will be helpful in terms of having that time, that dedicated time and space to reflect and to really look at what works and what doesn't and why, making the connection so that it's easier to make constructive choices moving forward. So, how can we begin to manage stress through self regulation? Here we can focus on what we can do, right? How can we focus on what we can do? Well, we have to begin to tap into our power of choice. Now, how can we take complete command over our power of choice? Well, I find that the easiest way to begin to do this is to reconnect, reset by returning home to the present moment, not taking the past and bringing it into the present moment, even though it's very real. We want to observe it. We want to learn from it. We can review it, but we don't necessarily have to relive it in the same way. So really kind of diving deep into the present moment so that we can begin to make the choices that are in alignment with the futures we would like to experience in the here and now. And this is where, in the here and now, where we can actually begin to engage the change. And this is where a mindfulness practice and meditation can be so helpful because it begins to give us access to ourselves and to our power of choice, because we have to become a little bit quieter, a little bit more still, and to go there and kind of work through the resistance to actually begin to tap into what's inside of ourselves. So, in a 2019 study titled Multisystem Resiliency as a Predictor of Physical and Psychological Functioning in Older Adults, and these were older adults age 60 plus with chronic low back pain, University of Florida researchers found that resilient individuals with a more resilient phenotype were linked to lower levels of disability, higher quality of life, and psychological functioning, and greater functional performance when compared to those with a lower degree of personal resources. And so here, I love this because we're looking at a holistic approach to cultivating resilience. And when these researchers were referring to personal resources, they were talking about psychological factors, health factors, physiological factors, and social domains of support, all of which have a positive impact on pain management, making it easier to work with pain, and also in shifting the stress response, sending the signal of safety to the individual. So now on to more mindset training, where we can begin to actually apply some of these concepts and cultivate increased states of self-efficacy and experiences of resilience through working with the mind and through working with these mental and emotional realms, really working with emotions as well. So much of mindfulness and meditation has to do with awareness of our experiences, being able to observe and become increasingly aware of what's going on within ourselves and outside of ourselves in the present moment so that we can connect to what's relevant and move from that space. So awareness is a big part of what we're up to. And we all know those states where we feel like we're running on autopilot and all of a sudden we're kind of shocked back into reality, or something kind of wakes us up and we enter into a new state of engagement with the present moment. And so if we're able to cultivate this awareness on a more consistent basis, we can begin to use it to our benefit to engage in change. Now, another big factor in terms of working with the stress response is to really begin to recognize that you are important and you're capable, right? It doesn't mean you're capable of everything at this moment in time, but in general, you are capable, and there are factors and choices that you can make, right? And if you begin to see yourself as important, then you begin to, on some level, identify yourself as worthy of being worked with, worthy of being helped. And these two factors, knowing that you're important and knowing that you're capable, they actually build you up, creating a more level perspective when it comes to working with stressors. So it actually creates this kind of clearance when it comes to a distorted perspective that levels it out and makes it so much easier to work with, because now it can work for you rather than against you, rather than being bigger than you, making you less than it, making it far more difficult to work with, creating more threat, more aversion, and more of that hedging into your experiences versus that acknowledging of them and embracing them and moving from that space. And when we're working with this process, we have to know that this is a landscape game as well. This is about trajectory. So setting the intention to kind of be more mindful, to work with our experiences, to learn from them, but then committing to that intention through what we can do, engaging the change from that space, and beginning to kind of connect with and name maybe some of the fears that are coming up, whether it's around aging, whether it's around feeling incapable, whether it's around hopelessness, whatever those fears are, it's really important to begin to name them, bring them into the light of day so they can begin to shift out. That's actually a big, big part of healing, is being able to acknowledge, embrace, and begin to express so that these fears can begin to kind of unhook and release their hold that they have on you. Because when they're suppressed and left in the dark, it's a lot scarier because they're rummaging around, creating noise in the mind, versus being in the light of day where you know what you are working with, you can see it clearly, and moving from that space. Now, in terms of mindset training, right, perception, how can we begin to work with perception to actually engage in that parasympathetic mode where we're feeling more relaxed, more calm, and more connected, and less in that fight, flight, or freeze state, right? Where we feel like we have to stay where we are and we're in that survival mode. How can we actually enter into a state of more vibrance, more vitality, into that more expansive versus contracted state? I find that these 4 factors can really assist right away. So often we stay in a perpetual victim mode, right? Everything's happening to us. I find that it's not necessarily that you always have to go gung ho and completely after embracing that, oh, everything is for me mentality, especially if you're in a state of pain and that doesn't necessarily feel realistic. But what I do find is important is by being able to go there in terms of maybe it could be for me, or how could this experience that's so difficult be for me? It allows us to connect with it differently because it's no longer the threat that it is when it's solely and completely gridlocked into being a to you experience. When we can recognize that all it is a shift in perception to just open up to maybe this is for me, it actually, and that encourages the healing process, we can begin to see perception as actually as very, very medicinal in this way. We can also begin to, instead of dividing ourselves from experience like it's the threat that our mind is telling us it may be, or like internally it may feel, if we begin to connect to these experiences, it can begin to also process through. Often we also judge our experiences as good, bad, ugly, but if we begin to kind of unhook that judgment and just begin to observe them, it's a lot easier to engage in a mindfulness practice and to actually work with what's coming up, because we can begin to observe it and work from that space versus getting caught up in the roller coaster and the fluctuations that judgment can often bring. Now, also, all of these factors will begin to remove the resistance that we have to engaging in our experience and cultivate that multi-system resilience that we're looking to bring in. So we won't dive too deep into it here, but diet and hydration are definitely important factors when it comes to working with the stress response. And if you haven't put effort into kind of figuring out and exploring the best diet for you, what foods really work for your body, and also what foods may be worth looking at removing or eating in moderation, it's definitely worth looking into. And of course, hydration is so important. The typical recommendation there is half your body weight in fluid ounces, clean filtered water, keep it simple. But diet and hydration are definitely two important factors to look into if you haven't already. And in building out a holistic recommendation, we of course want to look at lifestyle and anything else that can be supportive. So, when we're looking at things through a holistic lens, we want to think about relationships, spirituality. What does support and community look like in each individual's lives, in your own life, in the person that you're taking care of's life? We want to look at environment. Is that person, are you spending time in nature? What is your relationship to technology, right? Is it more reflexive in nature or intentional? Is our home and work organized? Are we making things easy for ourselves? Are we being on our own team? Are we moving? Are we taking time to laugh, to sleep, to relax, to engage in restorative practices like yoga and walking? And in terms of holistic support, are we getting the assistance that we need? Maybe looking outside of the box in some ways, maybe looking into supplementation that could potentially be helpful, or healing tools. There are two that I really like that I think are worth looking into, and I'll make sure you have all of these resources. But the Institute of Heart Math has done a lot of incredible research on mindfulness, meditation. They have a really cool heart-based practice that we're going to talk a bit about later on as we end this. And I also wanted to mention the Fisher-Wallace stimulator that actually has some interesting research in regards to pain and working with the mental and emotional realms as well. And then, of course, there are meditation apps like Headspace and so many great available tools nowadays. So, in working with stress and with pain, it's important to begin to explore our conventional perspective of stress and what's actually evidence based. New research is coming out and actually showing us that we don't need to necessarily stress about stress. Our perception actually influences the way our bodies respond to stressors in and of themselves. So if, for example, we see something is happening to us, we'll see it as more of a threat and we'll actually begin to physiologically react versus if we just observe it, right? We see it neutrally. We see it for it is what it is. But then we can actually shift gears and actually potentially see it as for us by seeking solutions and by being receptive to meaning. So, for example, with pain, we could actually apply this evidence-based approach and actually connect with it, observing it for what it is, and then seeing what we can make it in terms of what meaning can I extract from this experience? What can I do with it? And just shifting gears and becoming more solution oriented. We can actually engage this change by even asking new kinds of questions. So, what if the stress response is just my system's way of rising to the challenge? What if I could learn to work with my system? What if this pain is an opportunity to redirect and to actually let go of what does not work and optimize what does? All of this brings in new answers and connects us more with the process of healing and engaging this change and moving forward one step at a time. So, in a 2012 study titled, Does the Perception That Stress Affects Health Matter? The Association with Health and Mortality, researchers from Harvard University looked at the link between the belief that stress is bad for you and public death records. They concluded that both high amounts of stress and the perception that stress impacts health are each associated with poor health and mental health. Individuals who perceived that stress affects their health and reported a large amount of stress had an increased risk of premature death. Now, I learned about this study through a lady named Dr. Kelly McGonigal out of Stanford University, who wrote a book titled The Upside of Stress and gave a TED Talk on how to make stress your friend. And when I learned about this, I started to email this study to my patients on their first visit because I thought if there's anything I can do to add years onto their lives, I will. And if they can begin to see how powerful they are in terms of being able to choose how they perceive the events of their lives, I want to encourage that because not only can it add years onto their lives, it can make their quality of life better in the here and now. Okay, so on to mindfulness, meditation, and pain. So I've found that defining words can really be helpful in terms of clinical application. And so often in the research, meditation and mindfulness are kind of merged in terms of words, but they are a bit different. So they're not just interchangeable, even though they definitely have quite a bit in common. Meditation is a more broad spectrum word, meaning mindfulness can be a type of meditation, but meditation isn't really a type of mindfulness. And the way I would describe it is this: meditation is more of a self-reflective practice that can be displayed in a variety of ways. So there's heart-focused meditations, body scans, there's guided visualizations, there's mantras, breath work, moving meditations, but all of them require typically, other than mindfulness, really a focus on kind of taking that time and space and actually engaging in a self-reflective practice, where mindfulness can be used more about it's more about engaging the senses in the present moment while focusing on your sensory system and also focusing on your internal world. But meditation is actually more focused on that internal world, on thoughts, feelings, etc., whereas mindfulness is also the observation of that, but it's more along the lines of it can be clinically applied in real time as you're moving throughout your day. And it's not necessarily that you need to take that time and space to find a place to get comfortable, to sit in a seated posture. It's more of an exercise that you can engage in while you're in line at the grocery store or you're eating a meal with your friends. It's more real life mindfulness, just becoming increasingly aware. So both are great tools to know about, and we're going to explore more on them. And both of them have also been extensively proven to shift the stress response, to relieve pain by promoting presence, actually allowing acceptance of certain conditions to take hold. It increases that multisystem resilience. It clears distortion. It assists people in working through fear, boosting mood, and regulating all kinds of other physiological and psychological functions. Okay, more on meditation. One of the things that I love about meditation and about human beings in general is that we all have these world within worlds within us. And the research shows that we can actually experience more expansive states and states of expansion within ourselves by entering into and taking the time and space to actually meditate. The most pronounced versions of this would be something coined a state of coherence, where we actually come into harmony. Our hearts and our brains can actually begin to come into harmony, rewiring our nervous system towards health and healing. And even with different brain states, there's a lot of really interesting research around theta and alpha brain states, which is basically an experience of deepened relaxation. Now, in this way, meditation becomes medicine, right? And not in a competitive sort of way or a replacement sort of way, but as in a mutualistic sort of relationship with all that you're up to in your life in terms of your healing process. Meditation can be an incredibly helpful tool, and it's a practice that you can bring in to actually build you up and create an even more solid and resilient foundation. It also allows for neuroplasticity, meaning basically it can rewire the neurons in our brains, making it easier to make new choices and to engage in new behaviors. And it has a myriad of other health benefits that are so interesting to look into, from pain regulation to regulating digestion to boosting mood, decreasing stress, anxiety, depression, and giving us more access over ourselves and choices by way of shifting the nervous system and the stress response. Okay, so how can we begin to start a meditation practice in real life, right? I think it's really important to consider reality, what you would be interested in. So, bringing in that self awareness. What kinds of things do you like? Are you interested in more of a moving meditation? Are you interested in something that's more guided? Are you interested in something that allows for quiet, that's more silence and more focused on your internal workings, whether it's your breath or your heart? So there are a variety of meditations to check out, but I'm sure if you do some exploration, you'll find one that really lands and that really feels good for you. Same thing with time, right? I like to do meditation practices more in the morning often, or throughout the day if I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed or distressed. I think it's great to take a momentary pause and just reconnect, reset, and kind of remember that I can re-enter into that next moment in a better, sort of more present way that I feel really good about. So also in terms of meditation, and that's where, maybe we're actually looking at the interaction between mindfulness and meditation, because in the morning I'll take about 3 minutes to connect with my heart, and I'll go over that practice with you in a minute. But throughout the day, I feel like I use more mindfulness. I'm able to kind of take a step back, reconnect with my breath, and choose a new perspective so I can enter into that next moment. So using meditation and mindfulness maybe in different parts of the day. A lot of my patients also really like to engage in a meditation practice at night before bed, so they can engage that parasympathetic mode, they can wind down, they can relax, and they can fall into a deepened state of sleep while they relax just before that. And I think in terms of being flexible and looking at structure, when you're a beginner at anything, really being on your own team, allowing for space and grace, and allowing yourself yourself to try something, to explore it. You might not like everything. That's okay. You will find something that you do like if you're interested, and always kind of remembering why you started so you're able to show up and stay in it and pivot as need be. Okay, so now the heart-based practice. This is actually the first prescription I give to each and every one of my patients on their first visit. It's a simple 3-minute meditation, and it just begins to bring everything we've been going over together. And so, what it is it simply I teach my patients to reconnect, reset, and remember who, what, and where they are, and to reconnect to their heartbeat. So, going to their own heart, feeling their own heartbeat as this self regulating tool where they can breathe in a count of 5 and then exhale at a count of 5 as well until they fall into their own natural rhythm. And from that space, really reset, return home to the present moment, which is very hard. It's very hard not to be present when you're paying attention and you're focusing to your own heartbeat and just remembering who you are, that you have this incredible power to choose, and that you are capable, that you are unique, that you are important. And then you can begin to access that at any time, anywhere through the present moment. So that's kind of a little description of that who, what, where. But I find that from that space, you can actually begin to, understand that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, you are not your choices, you are not only your physiology and life experiences, right? You're the power behind them all. And in that, you can begin to shift your perspective. You can begin to believe in yourself versus a negative thought form, right? You can begin to transform your feelings. You can begin to connect with your body, to seek meaning, and to be receptive to yourself and to the process of life in a new and a more empowered way. So the heart-based practice is simple. There's not much to it. You can set your timer for 3 minutes. You can sit there. You can literally place your hands on your heart. You can't mess it up. What this does is it really sets off a complete cascade that actually begins to rewire your nervous system, manage the stress response, but also it begins to alleviate pain as well, because your system can't work without you. And so beginning to acknowledge yourself in this way as being able to have influence and to have this power of choice is something that is maybe the most healing application that we've talked about thus far in this slideshow. So with age, we may feel that the wind leaves our sails, we may lose hope for a solution, and unknowingly deepen into futile, recirculated choices, right? Or we may also find reverence and a deepened appreciation for this gift of life. That choice is ours. That's how powerful our perception is. Which choice will you make, right? Because perspective is relevant at any age. And if we close our eyes and reconnect and return home to the present moment, we can envision health and the life affirming choices that can bring us there, that can assist us in actualizing that experience now. Thinking about clean water, nutrients, fresh air, sunlight, an internal experience of health and vitality that extends far beyond the self. And so, if there's anything that I hope you remember, it's that you have worlds within you. And when you go to your heart, when you feel your heartbeat, I hope you can remember that. So, in summary, bringing this full circle, I think it's important to kind of go over just a couple of relevant points to bring this home. And one being that you can shift the tides towards health one step at a time. You're so much more than your experiences. You are not pain. You are not your diagnosis. You are not even your thoughts and your feelings. You're literally the perception behind it all. Really knowing that you are capable, you are important, you are unique, and remembering that who and what you are so you can activate it in the present moment, keeping it simple, focusing on the fundamentals, on what you can do, chopping wood, carrying water, finding peace within the process, and really embracing healing as a journey. So I hope you found this presentation helpful, and thank you so much for being here with me.
Perfect. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for watching that. Natalie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. Oh,
All right. So we have
thank you, guys.
several attendees on here, some items in the chat. So if you have any sort of immediate feedback or anything like that, feel free to let us know. But again, if you have questions that you'd like answered, go ahead and use that Q&A feature to let us know. If you can type your question in there, then we can get to those questions and get them answered. So just let us know in there, or in the chat feature, feel free to type something in for the panelists. But again, this is now time for our discussion portion of things. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and hopefully it has some wheels turning in your head, and you have a couple of things that you might want to ask about, dig a little bit further. I think that that would be helpful.
Great.
All right, and we have something popped up in the box. Can you see that okay, Brooke?
Yeah. Should I read it out loud, Natalie?
Yep, I'll
Okay.
go ahead and move it to answer live.
Do you find it easy to work alongside other healthcare providers, or do you often have to educate other clinicians? So I think what's really cool about healthcare in general is that I think each physician and each healthcare practitioner naturally specializes in just certain facets. And so I think it's a continual education of each other as we move along. But in my practice, a lot of times, I will work with empowering my patients to kind of see things in a holistic frame, to kind of organize and be able to communicate what's going on with their healthcare practitioners as well. So I think it is very easy to work alongside other healthcare providers. I find that as well. I think when I got into the holistic world, mine started really opening up. And a lot of the conventional doctors that I work with, I actually have a lot of conventional doctors that see me in my practice as well. And they just seem, just in general, I think it's all in the name of kind of being a team, communicating for the patients. And I have actually seen it be very easy to work with other healthcare providers, because I think most healthcare providers get in it because they have this heart of gold and really want to assist and help their patients. And so I think that I do quite a bit of education for other clinicians, but I'm educated by other clinicians. And I think it's been a very collaborative sort of experience so far in that way, if that answers the question.
Okay, and then just based on some questions that were emailed over, I think we'll start off with, how can I be more mindful in everyday life?
Absolutely. I think that just in general, setting that intention, you guys being here, taking the time out of your day to watch a presentation like this, I think that there's something that you've already done. You've already made a statement to be more mindful in your experiences moving forward, just by taking the time to engage in education such as this. And so I find, though, as well, just on more of a tactical, practical note, I have certain patients who will set little alarms throughout the day to just remind them to engage in that heart-based practice, or maybe they use Post-it notes and just kind of have that reminder to be more mindful. I think that mindfulness and presence is a continual coming back to on a lot of levels. A lot of times it's easy to get strung out, to get kind of caught up. But once we notice that kind of powerless sort of feeling happening and we're kind of feeling like we're slipping away from ourselves, just that continual noticing of I can come back to this moment and re-enter the next one for the better is absolutely key. And I find that that becomes easier as we practice it. And it kind of is one of those things that I don't feel like anyone ever masters mindfulness, right? I think it's kind of one of those things of we just continually use our intention and are committed to it throughout the day, and it continuously gets easier to come home because it feels better to be in that light of day and to be present and clicked in than checked out. And so that creates this natural gravitation to where it becomes easier and easier to become more mindful. But definitely making that statement to meditate, whether it's at night, whether it's in the afternoon, in the morning, whatever works for you guys. I find that that statement as well, or any practice that creates that awareness and that presence, that helps to assist that kind of downstream effect of just naturally being more mindful, because you're really making that statement that reverberates throughout the day and throughout the week and in general throughout your life, just noticing that you can actually work with your thoughts, work with your feelings, work with your experiences and your physiology, and you're not a victim to them.
Very good. And so a lot of apps and tools exist out there right now. Do you have any specific resources, whether it be a phone app, any other sort of resource, a website, books, anything like that, that you might recommend for meditation or mindfulness?
Absolutely. So, and books are a great idea as well. Audiobooks are wonderful. Headspace is probably the most common one. I have quite a few patients who use Headspace and love it, because what you can do is you can choose different categories. I'm sure they have an entire pain category in Headspace, which would be really interesting to look into. A lot of my patients also like an app called Calm. That can be an incredible resource. I also, in general, I have a lot of patients who love The Power of Now, a book called The Untethered Soul. I'm trying to think of more books regarding mindfulness, but if I think of any, I'll definitely shoot you an email, Natalie, to send that over. But the other thing that I find really, really helpful, all of my patients are starting to love like the Apple Watches. There's a kind of device called Whoop, and then there's the Fitbit. All of these things I find just create more system awareness of how our systems work throughout the day. And so strangely enough, that will create more mindfulness and presence for a lot of people. But then I find for this other subset of my patients, they do much better when they're not analyzing everything and getting in their head in that way. And so this is where I think self-awareness becomes pivotal, because you may be someone who really does well with all of that awareness, or you may be someone who does better in the engagement of the experience itself, which is where something maybe like a headspace or the heart-based practice is more effective. And of course, there are other forms of kind of taking notes, journaling. I know somebody asked about journaling, that can all create this awareness, and that can be devices. And I'm pretty sure there are quite a few apps that assist with journaling and the awareness in that way as well.
Perfect. And that actually goes well with our next question. It was just submitted here in the Q&A about kind of awareness. So if you want to go ahead and take that one on.
Awesome. Okay. Would you say mindfulness can be about being in tune with physical aches and pains as well? Absolutely. I find that so this is kind of how I see this potentially being helpful. So I think it's extraordinarily important to note the truth of where you're at, right? To absolutely be able to identify okay, I'm in pain, right? Because that's just true. And if we're trying to suppress and to deny that, it can't breathe. We can't look at it. It's hard to connect with it. It's hard to heal it and actually kind of turn towards solutions if we're kind of suppressing it in that way. So in terms of how to work with pain, I think it's so important to actually note it and allow ourselves to kind of to note it in a way where we're not fixated on it, but we're very open to the solution, and we connect to what we can do. So we can connect to asking a question, calling a physician, trying a yoga class, giving things a whirl. So noting it and really paying attention to the reality of the situation, setting the intention that I'm going to see how I can work with this, really focus on mobilizing myself, what I can do, allowing that expansion to take place, and then kind of knowing that, okay, this is being taken care of because I paid attention to it, and now I'm focused on moving forward in terms of being solution oriented in that way, if that makes sense.
All right, perfect. And I know we are just approaching a minute after 1 here, but I'll add in that people can go ahead and reach you at your website. So I'm going to pull up real quick all of that information again. We'll email this as well to the attendees. So with this slide here, so you can either contact myself, you received a couple of emails from me at this point, so it's just natalie.spindle@jax.ufl.edu. I'm happy to pass along questions. If you want to go straight to the source, Dr. Brooke Stuart's website, drbrookestuart.com. So you can go ahead and visit that in order to get some additional information or contact her if you'd like to do any follow-up. And then again, our website as well, where you might have found some of this information. So the PAMI website, PAMI, if you go ahead and do a search for that at UF, you can pull us up and you can connect with us that way. But again, on behalf of AI-PAMI, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the post survey to the chat box at this point, and then we'll go ahead and have any closing remarks from Dr. Brooke Stuart.
Great, you guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to reach out. You can definitely catch me on my website, email us there, and I'm happy to send you guys any resources that you may be interested in, or direct in any way I can be helpful. And thank you again, Natalie, for putting this together. It was a seamless process, and I really, really have enjoyed being a part of it.
All right, thank you so much. And again, thank you everyone. The link for the post survey has been dropped into the chat box. And again, we very much appreciate all of your time, as well as our presenter, Dr. Brooke Stuart's time today. If you'd like any more information, again, just feel free to reach out. If not, we'll see you at our next event if you'd like to join that as well. It's coming up on November 16th, but have a great afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.